Bumbaco. I'm an oncology dietitian. I work here at the center and I'm really I'm actually I've been here for 10 years. I've just celebrated that anniversary. So I feel like I'm just so proud and honored to be able to provide some information for the people that I work with in one-on-one consults, but also too for programs like this one. We've been doing Ask the Dietitian, which is what you're watching and what you signed up for today. If that's not the case, I think you should still stay on with me because it'll be enjoyable. But as a dietitian, we came up with like a couple years ago, and I remember when we first started, we did a half-hour segment. But just like a lot of other things at the center, this program has grown, and we just like a year ago we went from half an hour to 45 minutes because we found we needed more time for so many of the questions that our participants get the opportunity to ask me. And so we're finding that that's even maybe potentially needing to be revisited as well, because this time I had a handful of questions that were really phenomenal questions, and I want to dedicate the right amount of time to answer each one. So we're going to have a part two for Ask the Dietitian. So as Lisa shared before we started recording, that will be set for May 16th. So I hope you can join us for part two if we don't get to answer your question today. So I'm going to do what I typically do for Ask the Dietitian is if this is your first time visiting, I'm going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint presentation, which just includes all of the questions and then my best attempts at answering them. And then if you are curious about any other Ask the Dietitians, we have the whole collection is on our YouTube channel. So if you just go to, if you even just search YouTube Cancer Wellness Center, it'll pop up. Sometimes people subscribe to it, and that's helpful too. But it's the whole collection of all the Ask the Dietitians that have ever been done. So there's a lot. And all the other great stuff that's recorded here at the center. So it's definitely worth a visit. So when you register for my programs, we always give you the materials that are included, even if you have to leave early or come late. You'll get access to the recordings, you'll get the PowerPoint presentation, and then you'll get some other resources that I include. For Ask the Dietitian, I typically include some recipes that I think are sort of appropriate for the topic and might help you kind of use practical, delicious recipes that, really translate the information and the science of this into your day-to-day life. Okay, so without further ado, thank you for being here. I'm going to share my screen now, and I do appreciate your time with me this afternoon. Okay, so let me just get things going, and hopefully Lisa will just troubleshoot if there's any issues. But we practiced ahead of time. So if you weren't aware and you didn't have an opportunity to see what the topic was, it's all about hydration, but specifically beverages and drinks that go beyond just hydrating us. And we had some great questions that were submitted. So I'm going to list them, provide my answers, and then at the end, so this will be included in part two, I'm going to offer some additional resources and then those recipes. So let's get into those questions. So sometimes people ask similar questions and I lump them together in one, and this is an example. We're going to start here. Are electrolytes good for you? Electrolytes in water, are they important or not? Is Gatorade Power, which is like an example of electrolytes, is that okay to use since you can control how much water you add to it? Really all great questions. I love to I love to include almost anytime I'm presenting on any topic, something that's um, informative, like in terms of, let me backtrack. A lot of the information we get comes from somewhere, right? About like nutrition and food and diets. We get this. We're like bombarded anywhere we turn. Like we could be at the salon and people are talking about the newest food, right? Or the latest diet trend. Or we're scrolling social media, or we're just innocently like watching the news. There's like just so much information out there, and so sometimes that information is deserving of our time, but I would say that's in a very small percentage of the time. Most of the information that we're exposed to is really meant to grab our attention. And this is a good example. So I don't know about, I just like searched an image of electrolyte drinks and this is what came up. Now I've never heard of Maximus, but right off the bat, I'm already sort of having this perception of what Maximus really is in a drink. It's a gentleman that's standing on these horses, and it looks like he's ready to tackle the world, right? Because of this electrolyte drink, more do. I mean, we're going to clarify what does that really mean, right? And I think like if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, I don't know what to do, please reach out. This is why I'm here at the center. Everyone I meet with, I have an individual specific conversation with, and I'm going to give tailored advice to. Okay, so I'm going to get off my soapbox about that and get to these questions. Okay, but just a little nod to like some of the information that's out there. It sometimes can be misleading, and that came up several times with the questions that were answered. Okay, so we're going to start first, just like a review about hydration. So did you know this? About 2/3 of our body weight is water. All our cells need water in order to work. Water is also the base for all different body fluids like saliva, blood, urine, sweat, and joint fluid. So we cannot survive without it. Our body loses water when we sweat, when we urinate, and also have a bowel movement. But also, too, did you know this? Even through respiration, we're losing some fluids. We need to drink enough water to replace that. So if we're losing more because maybe we are sweating more or we're finding we're urinating more for some reason, we need to replace that. If we don't do that, we run the risk of becoming dehydrated. Now, there are some of us in certain conditions, like if we are really exercising a lot, exercising in extreme heat, if we have like what I would say like a GI bug, we have diarrhea, we're vomiting, we're losing fluids, right? More than normal. We may run the risk of dehydration. So we may definitely lose fluids. And sometimes, depending upon the person and depending upon the extent of the situation, we may also be losing electrolytes. Now, what are electrolytes? Electrolytes are minerals that have an electric charge. That sounds scary, right? When they're dissolved in water or body fluids, including our blood. The electric charge can be positive or negative, and examples of electrolytes are sodium, potassium, chloride, magnesium, calcium phosphate, and bicarbonates. We obtain electrolytes from both the foods that we eat, but also some fluids that we have in our diet. Now, electrolytes have a lot of responsibilities, and that's probably why I think there's, this concern about it, and I think maybe some food companies and the food industry is sort of tapped into this concern of like, are we getting enough electrolytes because they have so many responsibilities in our body. They balance the amount of water in our body. They balance our pH level. They move nutrients into our cells. They move waste out of our cells. They support our muscle and nerve function. They keep our heart rate and rhythm steady. They keep our blood pressure stable. And they also help support our skeletal system. So all really important stuff here, right? Now, who needs electrolytes? We all technically do, but who needs it added to their water? I would say if you find yourself in this situation, if you're losing more than normal amounts of fluids because you're sweating a lot, because you're exercising for more than 1 hour, or maybe you're moving your body less than an hour, maybe you're doing like hot yoga for less than an hour, or it's extreme temperatures, it's very hot outside, it's very humid, and you're sweating a lot. That's more than normal, right? You may wish to consider some electrolytes to your water. If you have vomiting and diarrhea, this definitely is the case where I am clinically on the front lines where people are getting chemotherapy. Sometimes we have individuals who need more electrolytes because of that situation. Then there's an if and a then here, right? Then we may benefit from electrolytes because we're losing them because we're also losing the fluids along with them. High performance athletes exercising in extreme heat, those who have a stomach bug, those are all good examples. Sports drinks and electrolyte replacement options typically are designed like they were developed, and I didn't include this in the presentation, but Gatorade was developed out of from the University of Florida, if anyone isn't aware of that. And it was really to help, I think, their football team, who they were needing the right replacement in terms of the carbohydrates or sugar. So it's literally simple sugars plus sodium and a little bit of potassium plus the right amount of water. And it's like the ideal proportion of all of those things. That is what is intended for most people that are performance athletes. Those are the ones that those sports drinks are designed for, not your everyday person or like your weekend marathoner, as we call them. Probably we don't need that type of sports drink to help support our performance. Electrolytes are very easy to get from the foods that we eat, as long as we're eating a balanced diet, right? But it's not that hard. We just need to eat some fruits, some vegetables. Guess what? These are all cancer fighting foods, beans, dairy products, as well as lean protein. And most of us are eating too much salt, but maybe someone's not eating a lot of salt and they cut back on salt, but they're losing it because of because they're sweating or they're exercising or they have a GI bug. If we're not having any salt in our cooking, then maybe we want to double check some of these things. Okay, a little bit more about this. So, electrolyte drinks and powders. Sometimes we need to know who this isn't appropriate for. And I would say these are sort of the extreme conditions where there's much better ways to help yourself if you have high blood pressure or kidney disease. But if I was working with someone who had uncontrolled high blood pressure or someone who had kidney disease, we would probably double check what's in some of their beverages and does it have too much sodium? That's what we're mostly looking at. Or for someone with kidney disease, does it have too much potassium if we're on a potassium restricted diet? For the most part, most of us would know that because our healthcare team would advise us about this. Too much of those things, especially sodium, can upset the body's electrolyte balance, right? And it can overall contribute to excessive sodium intake. Some of the products on the market have a lot of added sugars. And do we necessarily need all those added sugars? Because we might want to limit our added sugar intake as well. And I've learned this a while ago, actually in grad school, and when I took an adult performance class, which basically is like sports nutrition. I learned that even if someone is like an Ironman, which who came up with that word, but an amateur athlete to someone who is maybe a professional athlete, we advise that they get most of their electrolytes from whole foods because there's advantages to that. Sometimes those electrolyte drinks are used in a very specific way for those individuals. But when we eat our electrolytes from whole foods, we're not going to overdo it, right? Whereas electrolyte drinks, electrolyte powders are sort of like concentrated and easy to overdo potentially. So a little bit more to this. So just a reminder on daily limits on sodium and added sugar. We want to limit total sodium to 2,300 milligrams per day. And we want to limit added sugar to less than 5 to 10% of calories in a day. And that equates to about 30 to 36 grams of added sugars or 6 to 9 teaspoons, whichever way your mind can work those numbers, I want you to use. If you're still confused about that, consult with a dietitian. He or she can help you work through that. Now, there are trade-offs to this, right? So if you are eating a low sodium diet, you're eating a low added sugar diet, and you want to use one of these electrolyte drinks because it helps you drink more fluids or because you started sweating more, okay, it can work, right? Just knowing what your limits are and knowing that sort of there's like a budget here, then you can fit some of these into that budget. But don't fall for those gimmicks and those, especially marketing gimmicks, that make you think that those electrolyte drinks and those sports drinks are essential for you because chances are you already have plenty. And the minuscule amount that they're adding to those drinks are not really necessarily going to benefit you. So here's the bottom line. Hopefully, after all of that information, after most exercise bouts, so I'm someone who exercises regularly, sometimes an hour or a little less than an hour a day. Most of the times, I don't do a sports drink or an electrolyte replacement drink because the water and the food that I'm about to eat within the next couple of hours is going to replenish what I just lost. If you fall into the category of exercising more than an hour, or if you're losing a lot of sweat through exercising in the heat. So another good example for me personally is if I'm training for a race, like a half marathon, and I'm running a couple hours on a weekend, and I try to beat the heat, but maybe I finish in the end and I'm pretty hot and it's pretty humid, then I probably need a replacement drink. And I probably need to have a little bit of sodium, a little bit of sugar in my water after I've done running, because that's going to replenish the fluids and replenish my electrolytes a little bit quicker so that I can get up and do a run the next day. Okay. So a good rule of thumb is if it's more than an hour, or we're losing a lot of sweat through exercising in the heat, even if it's less than an hour, or again, if we're suffering from a GI bug, then an electrolyte drink might be beneficial. We can also make our own. I know that's a wild thought, right? But some people are really curious to try this for themselves, especially people who are, kind of anti processed foods or just looking to like use their own ingredients when they're making things for themselves. So this is an oral rehydration drink. And I've worked with some athletes who have done this. It's a liter of water, 6 teaspoons of sugar, and a half a teaspoon of salt. Wild, right? Now you might be put off by that amount of sugar, right? But that is a true oral rehydration drink because the salt actually follows the sugar into our blood cells. And that's what helps us rehydrate. Um, so if you're thinking, oh, that looks like a lot, and the sports drinks on the market don't have that amount of sugar, sometimes they use an artificial sweetener to make their product. So we see that this is not necessarily, a lot of the products on the market are not necessarily designed the way that they should be intended to be designed. Okay. So that type of oral rehydration drink is someone who needs it. Okay. And maybe you do, maybe you don't. Otherwise, those electrolyte drinks and powders do not hydrate more than just plain water and supply an insignificant amount of electrolytes that we otherwise can and is recommended for us to eat. Hopefully that is helpful for that. Can hydration drinks potentially dehydrate you? I don't think so. I sat with this question for a minute and I was like, no, I don't think that can dehydrate us. So here's what causes dehydration: not drinking enough water or other fluids in a day, excessive loss of fluid. So as I described in the last, answering the last question, a lot of sweating, vomiting, diarrhea, increased urination for some reason. That's an excessive loss, more than normal. Medical conditions such as diabetes, pregnancy, this can predispose us to the risk for dehydration. Medications such as diuretics, especially if someone's like just starting on a diuretic, that can increase urination. And if someone's not drinking enough to recuperate that amount, that can lead to dehydration too. Most liquids, with the exception of alcohol, contribute to total fluid intake. Did you know that? So even a few cups of coffee, that actually contributes to our hydration status. So, I'm hard pressed to say that a hydration drink could dehydrate us. I thought that was a really interesting question. I don't think that it could be dehydrating at all. And hopefully that's an okay answer for that question. Okay, next is, I love carbonation, but I've heard it was bad for me. Could you explain why carbonation is bad? Is aspartame-free seltzer bad for me? So a couple similar questions here I lumped together again. So is carbonation bad? What an interesting question. Carbonated beverages include a lot of different options, right? You're probably familiar with this. Carbonated water, there's seltzer, there's sparkling water. It's basically water infused with carbon dioxide gas that's been added to it, right? Club soda is sparkling water with minerals added, including sodium. They can include added flavors and colors, of course. The nutrition content is going to vary widely, and it's all based on the brand. Carbonated water is just as hydrating as regular still water, and it is a desirable alternative to the sugary drinks on the market. And I'm going to talk about that. Some may experience eructation. I hope I pronounced that correctly. That's the fancy medical term for belching. Some report carbonation actually aids in relieving stomach aches. So everyone's experience with that is different. And I think like you'll know, right, based on your own experience and what your preferences are, whether or not it's an acceptable choice for you. Here are some of the myths about carbonated beverages. They're bad for our bones, they're bad for our teeth, they trigger our appetite. Have you heard of that one? It makes us more hungry when we drink a carbonated beverage. I feel like I've heard the opposite, that it fills us up. Artificial flavoring is bad. A little bit more to that. So here's what we do know about carbonated drinks. Research has found that there is an association between cola, specifically cola, consumption and lower bone density. This is not the case for carbonated water. There have been no associations found. They think the link between cola consumption and bone density may be due to its phosphoric acid, which is just that's an additive that comes from phosphorus, which is a natural mineral that we need in our diet. And they're blaming the phosphorus and the amount of the phosphorus that is in the standard American diet, but specifically in cola. And that may inhibit calcium absorption. And that may actually be the link. I did an Ask the Dietitian probably a couple years ago now on bone health, and I addressed this question more in depth. So I think if you're curious about this particular link, I would look for that Ask the Dietitian on the YouTube channel. Fruit flavored sparkling water is significantly more acidic and could contribute to dental erosion. However, the effect is thought to be very low. Okay, so just some thoughts. Now I'm going to give some guidance about sparkling water in our dental enamel um, at the end of this question. But the high acidity and sugar content of sugar sweetened beverages, but carbonated ones like Coke and Pepsi, they erode tooth enamel. We know this about them. Okay, so if you're comparing the two categories of a soda to a sparkling water, the soda is way worse for dental enamel. And in fact, one study found that soft drinks are 100 times more corrosive than any sparkling water is. That's kind of alarming if you ask me. All right, more about what we know about carbonated drinks. There was one small animal study that I found that carbonated water caused an increase in a hormone called ghrelin, and this ghrelin stimulate has been shown to stimulate our appetite. Well, that's enough to maybe give pause to for some people, right? Like, oh, maybe they do raise our appetite. However, that one little small animal study is not enough. We need evidence. And if we're going to make a recommendation about something and really give a conclusive, definitive answer, we want more than just one small animal study. Okay. And I would say also to this, trust your own body's cues about physical hunger and physical satisfaction. If you drink a carbonated beverage and you notice, and hopefully there's no placebo effect here, or not placebo effect, the you know what I'm trying to share. We don't, there's some psychology involved, right, with eating here. And I don't want to sort of have you assume now, like, oh, is this going to make me hungry? If you notice, just notice or think back when you drink a carbonated beverage, how does that make your body feel? And actually, when we do this with anything that we eat or drink, I think that's a great idea because then we're more in tuned with our body's cues. We're more able to really sit and savor what it is that we're eating and drinking. And that's just a really great example of really exploring mindfulness in a way that can probably benefit us in so many different ways. So I think like just work with that if you've noticed that. Experts recommend we limit excessive amounts of artificial sweeteners like aspartame and sucralose, which is Splenda, just to kind of answer that question. That was part of this block of questions. And I, as an oncology dietitian, I tend to find I recommend that we limit artificial sweeteners. They just sort of set us up to have a deceived palate in that most of these artificial sweeteners are hundreds, literally hundreds of times sweeter than regular sugar. And I almost would prefer that people just learn to kind of reset their palate and learn how sweet is just sweet enough, right? So that they can learn that they don't need to rely on things that are hundreds of times sweeter for satisfaction. We don't think that there's a link between artificial sweeteners and cancer risk, and that's another Ask the Dietitian probably on our YouTube channel. I'm pretty sure I covered that numerous times. So just to put that concern, rest assured about that concern. However, if you're someone who isn't willing to risk anything, then I would say yes, minimizing this, that's your choice, that's your power, and I would encourage you to minimize artificial sweeteners. Okay. Be mindful of sodium. So tonic may contain 100 to 200 milligrams of sodium per serving. And if you remember, I gave a limit before. So if you're having a few servings of tonic in a day, how much is that adding up to your total? So here are some tips to kind of give that bottom line for sparkling water. Here are some ideas for sparkling water fans. If you're worried about your teeth enamel, what they recommend is not to brush your teeth for at least 30 minutes after you've had a carbonated beverage. I think that's really helpful. That's good for me to know because I enjoy carbonated beverages. The acid in the sparkling water softens up the surfaces of our enamel, so that makes it more sensitive to abrasion, and that's why that recommendation is there. They also suggest not to sip them all day without eating. So the longer the acids come into contact with teeth, the more damage they may potentially do. Some people recommend using a straw because maybe they're having less exposure to their teeth when they're using a straw for their carbonated beverages. And another thing, because in the world of oncology, I do work with some people who have a dry mouth related to their treatments. Saliva is really important for us and it helps neutralize acid. So if we have a dry mouth, we're having less an ability to minimize that potential damaging effect of the acids that are in it. So just think twice, or try to explore some of these other ways, or talk to your trusted dental care provider about some other suggestions as well. Stay tuned. I have some great recommendations. They're going to be in part two for this Ask the Dietitian for the month of May. I have some great recommendations for choices. Okay, next set of questions. Kombucha. Is it okay if you drink a low sugar version? Is it a good drink to add to your diet? What about the sugar in it? So similar questions. I think really great ones. So kombucha, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a tea that's fermented, and they use sugar tea and something called a SCOBY. And SCOBY stands for a symbiotic culture of both bacteria and yeast. And it's said to have originated in Asia during the Sin Dynasty in 212 BC. It's a long time ago. And it's believed to have gotten its name from a Korean physician named Kambu, who introduced it to Japan around 415 AD. Funny, a physician said, hey, drink this fermented product. It might be good for you. What do you know? That may set us up for the answer to this question. All right, we have a lot of commercial products to choose from, right? Kombucha really has been a trendy option, I find, over the past few years. Each have their own flavor and different profile in terms of nutrition. There's lots of brands out there, but here are some popular ones that I know I've seen. Okay, so is it a healthy choice? So what we know about kombucha is that it is rich in probiotics because of that fermentation process. And probiotics are a great choice in order to keep our gut flora happy, healthy, and functioning the way we want it to. When our gut flora is functioning well, there is a decrease in whole body inflammation, as well as an increase to support a properly working immune system, which is really great for most of our survivors. Tea also contains polyphenols, so I would classify tea as well as coffee, and we'll talk about that in part two. They are cancer fighters. Tea is a cancer fighting food, and all kinds, but mostly the true teas. So black, green, oolong, white teas, those contain the highest amount of polyphenols, and they act like antioxidants. So we're seeing what's happening here with kombucha. It seems like it's sort of adding up here. Now, kombucha, and based in the research, and this is preliminary, but we'll take it. So we apply a little bit of grain of salt with this type of information, but there has been some data that suggests that there's a reduction in cholesterol levels, decreased cancer growth, and it might be related to the polyphenols in the tea, and also improved liver and gastrointestinal conditions. So we see like it really has a broad effect too on a lot of our health conditions. Keep in mind that kombucha will not benefit our health if the rest of our diet or the rest of our lifestyle is unhealthy, right? So it's not like this miracle cure for things, right? And I think it's always important to point that out. We want the whole picture, right? So my answer is yes, it's a healthy choice, but there's a little bit more to share about kombucha. So it does contain trace amounts of alcohol. So good to know if you're someone who's really limiting the alcohol amounts, you can check your labels to see it's very, very, very small amounts, but still need to know that. It may contain a significant amount of added sugar, up to 9 grams. And if you remember, I shared it in my answer to the first question, experts limit us, or they recommend that we limit to about 30 to 36 grams per day. So that 9 grams looks like it could contribute a significant amount of our total added sugar intake, right? And there it is again. So some will actually recommend less, so 25 grams. We get to decide, and this is where trade-offs begin. So let's say I'm working with someone who really does not eat a lot of added sugar. They don't use added sugar in their diet. They don't eat foods that have added sugars to them, but they really like this one kombucha, and it has 9 grams of added sugar. Are they within their limit for the day? They sure are. So they get to decide, right? Because the whole package, even with that added sugar, that whole package may benefit them, right? And it's hard to really say in a group setting like this, is it a good choice for you or not? That again is best decided in a one-on-one consult with me. But I think for the sake of this audience, hopefully you're seeing that this can work. It definitely could work in a healthy diet. Home brewers, you also, I want you to know this too. Home brewers, because I know people that do brew their own kombucha, there is the risk of foodborne illness because of the growth of bacteria and mold. So, especially if you're on active treatment and you're immunocompromised, this is good to know. If the SCOBY grows a mold, it needs to be tossed for sure. And to store kombucha away from direct sunlight, that makes it less likely to grow mold. And then sanitizing brewing containers are essential. So if you're someone who dabbles in this or wants to dabble in it, I just want you to know about that. You want to practice food safety as it relates to preparing your kombucha. So here's my bottom line on kombucha. It's a healthy choice. Check labels because some have that high amount, like 9 grams of added sugar. Some have maybe like 2 grams. And that's a really great choice then, right? Because that's not a lot of added sugar, if you ask me. That's less than a teaspoon. So I think you get to decide here. You get to review what your total diet is, how many added sugars are you getting from other foods otherwise, and does this fit in your picture for what looks like a healthy choice? I think most of you will find that's going to be your best answer. Okay. All right. Next question. I think this is going to be our last question. Do diet sodas increase the risk of heart attack and stroke? Great question. An observational study, and there's a little bit more than just this observational study, but I thought this was an important one to include. In 2019, they found that people who drank more than 2 diet drinks, diet soda, per day had an increased risk for stroke and for developing coronary heart disease compared to those who drank none. That's typically how research studies work in nutrition. They take people who drink a certain amount or a very high amount, compare them to people who don't do it at all. Right. So sometimes people are like in the middle and we don't really know what those risks are. Right. So that's all important as it relates to nutrition research. They found in this study that the risk was higher in certain women, those who have obesity and those who are African American. Interesting, right? What explains that? They followed a lot of people. So they followed over 81,000 women and they were 50 to 79 years old and they followed them like for quite some time during the 90s. It was a part of the Women's Health Initiative study, actually. While the study found a modest increase in risk, and this is what the authors concluded, it's still too early to draw definitive conclusions. There is still so much to be learned. And that's a properly worded research study. Most research is designed in a way where it leads us not to get an answer, but to have more questions, unfortunately. So then more research is done and more research is done, and then we find what our evidence is, and then we might be able to make a recommendation. So observational studies like this one mean that the results need to be interpreted with caution. So here's the thing, we're talking about diet soda. Here's what I want you to know about soda and other sugary drinks. There's definitive evidence. It's linked with obesity. So sugar sweetened beverages contribute to weight gain more than solid foods because the body doesn't compensate fully for beverage calories by reducing calorie intake from other foods. Adults who drink one sugary drink or more per day are 27% more likely to be overweight or obese than non-drinkers, regardless of some controlled variables like their income or their ethnicity. Sugary drinks put us at risk for diabetes. So people that consume sugary drinks regularly, 1 or 2 cans a day or more, have a 26% greater risk of developing type 2 diabetes than people who rarely consume them. The risks are even greater for younger adults, and I'm not sure why that is. Tooth decay. Soda consumption is associated with nearly twice the risk of cavities in children and increases their likelihood in adults. Obviously, we want to maintain our oral health. Heart disease is also a concern about sugary drinks. Men who drink more than 1 can of a sugary drink per day have a 20% higher risk of having a heart attack or dying from a heart attack than men who rarely consume sugary drinks. A related study in women found a sugary drink and link with heart disease risk. So here's the bottom line. And I really like part of this answer, so hopefully you're still staying tuned. So far, research on diet soda's relationship to cardiovascular disease and stroke included raises more questions than it does answers. So just like all observational studies, we take the results of this, which got really, I think it was out there in the press, right? But it was one study, so we have to take the results with a grain of salt. There could be something else that explains the link between those two. We call those confounding variables. So something that we didn't know, something that the researchers did not include in that study might be to blame for that link. Sometimes making a healthy choice is a slam dunk. And I think and hopefully that's something that I feel like this is increasingly important for me to communicate to anyone I work with and in my presentations. There are some things that are so obvious that we just need to remind ourselves and not get distracted by it, by anything else that's happening in the world. We know there are some things that confidently can improve our health. And that's why I shared that example about sugary drinks. Sugary drinks, we know they are not good for us. So, do I worry about diet soda consumption? Less so, because there's less evidence when there's clear cut data that suggests that sugary drinks are not beneficial for us and potentially harmful. So, other examples are smoking. If we quit smoking and we exercise more, we know they're very good for us. There's no debate about that. Other times it's a little bit of a tougher call. Okay, so what I would say is that if you agree, especially as it relates to stroke or heart disease, if you agree you are living a healthy lifestyle, and then you're like, you know what? I drink a diet soda a day, or I drink two a day. Maybe I could cut back. I agree. I agree with that decision because why not? Right? Because there are other things that you can replace and really benefit from. For example, kombucha or like even tea, brew your own tea or ice your tea, coffee. That's going to benefit you more than a diet soda would. So that's going to add to your lifestyle and especially your heart healthy lifestyle, but also a cancer protective lifestyle. Okay, so hopefully that's a helpful answer to that question. We're at the end of part 2 or part 1. I'm so sorry. I'm checking that you're paying attention. So I'm going to stop my share here and I hope you all will get to join me for part 2. But I'm going to stop my share and see if there's just a couple questions that are left to answer from today.
Yes, ma'am. We just have 2.
Thank you.
And first one is, how many teaspoons is 2,300 milligrams of sodium?
1. No, not even. It's like I'll put it in the email. It's like a quarter of a teaspoon. It's not a lot.
Okay, good answer for
It's
this person
scary.
asking.
I'm wrong. It's a teaspoon. It's a teaspoon of sodium, of salt is that much sodium. It adds up quickly. So we just want to know, and I think there's some information about excessive sodium being inflammatory, but again, we want to put it into context of the lifestyle. It can over time lead to the increasing our risk for high blood pressure. So too much sodium is not a good thing over time. We want to try to cut back if we can.
Okay, last question.
Yes.
Does it matter if your tea is hot or cold?
No, I think as it relates to cancer protectors, no. Something like green tea, they do want us to steep longer. And some people are like, yeah, that gets even more bitter tasting. And that's probably what some of those compounds are, is the bitter taste is actually what is protective for us. So I say if you like tea, just drink it. Think about what you add to it. Hopefully, it's not a lot of sugar if you can help it. But I would encourage you to think of true teas being black, green, oolong, and white tea. Those have more cancer fighters. We're going to talk about herbal teas in part 2, which are really interesting too and just different. But the true teas seem to be the most cancer protective if that's what you're looking for.
Perfect, that's it.
Okay.
Well, thank you everybody for joining. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks for part 2.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Lisa.